2, 3, 4. Let me tell you, PuckPedia stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to PuckPedia Cap Central, February 26th. We are back after our Olympic hiatus. I'm your host, Keith Kavanaugh, alongside Hart Levine. Hart, how you feeling about the Olympics? Your Canadian boys did not get the job done in the gold medal match.
Yeah, it was an exciting tournament, exciting game. Still confused how the Taves play didn't go in, and McKinnon, and a 5-on-3 and a couple breakaways. But yeah, I guess that's hockey, and it's kind of funny because I thought the Four Nations final, the U.S. probably carried the play, and Canada won in overtime, and this was kind of the reverse, where Canada, I thought, really dominated for the last two periods, and then you don't score, and then the other team scores in overtime. So that's how it works out sometimes in hockey. You got
That's
a rubber thing bouncing around on ice.
Exactly. And like you said, yeah, we don't have to beat it with a dead drum. I think every other hockey show out there has already broken down the gold medal game, but incredible just performance. And then last night with Jack Hughes in Jersey, great ceremony there. So love to see my guy Jack have my girlfriend fix his teeth for him. She's a dentist, so we'll see if he gets those chiclets or if that's his new staple moving forward. And he just goes kind of teethless out there. Before we get into today's episode too, we did want to just talk about we had a couple good interviews over the past couple weeks on PuckPedia Hockey Show. We had Chris Pronger on, who was talking about his kind of path through the NHL. He didn't necessarily go the most traditional route, and then he gave us a great breakdown for the Olympic medal round. So good episode with Chris. Love having him on. He's been everywhere, so good to get his perspective on things. And then we had Ian Pulver this past week. Ian's agent, represents a good amount of players in the NHL, founder of Will Sports Group. He had a bunch of good stuff as well, talking about what it's like as an agent during the trade deadline, how to navigate all that communication, and especially in this new age media with all the reporters and insiders and information that leaks out at this time. Some of it accurate, some of it just smoke screens. And I think Ian did a good job explaining how that goes. He also had some good stuff on the MLBPA. They're possibly going through a lockout because of their lack of a salary cap. And so he wanted to talk through how that would be kind of impacted, for the MLB, but like using an NHL kind of spin on it, because previously he was a counsel for the NHLPA. So all in all, good episodes on PuckPedia.
Yeah, some great episodes. And next week we have a special trade deadline preview prep one. We'll keep it a little mystery for the guests, but I think it'll be a good special edition where we kind of combine the PuckPedia Hockey Show and Cap Central all into one.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one too. That'll be coming out on Wednesday. There's also new news for PuckPedia. We now have, I think, Discord notifications. So PuckPedia alerts kind of going right to the Discord server. So do you want to talk about that real quick?
We've had that for a while. We just promoted it a little bit more today. To be honest, I don't even know what Discord is, but people use it and people like it. I like the notifications to the email which we have. You can sign up for that on the site. But yeah, if you're a Discord mod, I tweeted out the instructions that were given to me, and I copied and pasted them because, like I said, I don't know what Discord really is. Yeah, and if there's any questions, send us a note and we can help you get set up.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you're going to be answering those questions, probably directed towards Taylor and the crew over there. But
exactly.
Yeah, and just remember, subscribe to the YouTube. That's where you're getting all the content. Follow along on Instagram. I'm sure you guys are already following on X. That's where you're watching the show right now. It's also live on YouTube. And then obviously going to puckpedia.com as we prepare for one of the biggest traffic days on site coming up with the trade deadline next Friday. Let's dive right in here, Hart. So as soon as the Olympic roster freeze kind of unfroze, we had a trade kind of immediately as soon as that happened between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Colorado Avalanche. I thought it was a tidy piece of business for both teams here. So we had the Pittsburgh Penguins trading Brett Kulak to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Sam Girard and a 2028 second-round draft pick. So in this deal, Pittsburgh's taking on $2.25 million in net annual cap hit. Kulak is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. He was traded to the Penguins in the Tristan Jarry, Stuart Skinner swap. And then Girard, on the other hand, is in year 6 of 7 on a $5 million cap hit deal. He'll be a UFA next year at age 29. I think people think Sam Girard's a little bit older. He's been around the NHL a lot, but he's only 29 at the end of that deal. So now Colorado, though, for me, I think this deal is interesting for both sides. I think Dubas does a really tidy piece of work, adding a second-round pick and a player like Sam Girard, a guy that they can use on their back end to generate some offense. Pittsburgh now has 16 draft picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 drafts. So a lot of draft capital for Dubas and crew. He basically turned Jari and Sam Poulin into 2 second-round picks, Stuart Skinner and Sam Girard. We'll see what other moves they have on the horizon with Sidney Crosby out for the next month or so. And then Colorado, on the other hand, now has $10.8 million of projected cap space at the trade deadline. So they are definitely open for business. They're the best team in the NHL this year. And with that much space, you expect a contender of that level to really level up here. What's your view on the trade, and what do you think is next for both teams here?
Yeah, it was certainly interesting because, some people might like, Kulak because he's definitely proven in the playoffs he can step up, and he doesn't really get himself into any trouble. He's not a physical player, but he's definitely a tall player. Uses his body. Whereas Girard, the knock is always, maybe a little too small, a little too light. And so I think there's arguments pro and con like for each player, and obviously like Girard's age a bit better. And then when you see that the contract, Kulak's a lot, almost half the price. So you wondered like, okay, maybe each side sees something they like in the other player. Again, Pittsburgh gets the younger player under contract more, maybe a little bit more offensive. Colorado saves some money, has a little bit more proven player. So that seems like probably been fair because most teams would like each player, right? But then you add in that Pittsburgh also got a second-round pick, and that's where it tips to me towards like that being a really good deal for Pittsburgh. Because, like I said, I think if it was a straight-up deal, you would think that makes a lot of sense for Pittsburgh as well. But then they also get the second-round pick. To me, that's like really shrewd work there. And then if you combine kind of or go back to the whole trade tree, and you start thinking like in the Jari and Skinner trade, it did seem like Kulak was sort of in there to just balance the money for Edmonton because they needed to, basically have the same cap hit going in and out when they acquired Jari. And we talked about this when we talked about that trade. Like, would Edmonton have been better off trading Kulak somewhere else? Obviously, Girard wasn't going to be a fit because of his cap hit, but like, could you have traded Kulak somewhere else and got an asset or assets, and then separately acquire Jari? Because again, it doesn't seem to me they got rid of Jari, they moved Jari, they got Skinner, and they got a second-round pick. Was Pittsburgh going to say no if they didn't get Kulak as well, right? So could Edmonton have maybe harvested some more assets by moving Kulak elsewhere, or did they feel like this was like a one-stop shop, other than also getting Spencer Stastny, but kind of get it done at that point? It was a few weeks before the holiday break, so maybe they just wanted to get the deal done with. But you just see like Kulak played pretty well with Pittsburgh, not as well as he's played in the past, and he got again a second-round pick plus a positive asset. So it's just interesting like how it all works out when you trace it back to the trade tree.
Yeah, and I think from Colorado's point of view too, like they just re-extended Sam Malinsky to, I think it was about 4.75 million for 4 or 5 years, and so that looks like a move where they knew that Sam Girard was going to be moved, whether it was at this deadline or in the offseason. Like there's a lot of redundancy kind of between the two players, and especially with both their cap numbers, you kind of saw the writing on the wall for Girard. So I thought it was a good piece of business to get more of like a little bit more defensive defenseman and a guy whose contract comes off the books at the end of the season, whereas Girard had another year at $5 million. And then Colorado now positions themselves to basically do whatever they want at this trade deadline. They could use the cash available if they want to, and you expect them to when they're kind of a top flight contender. There's a lot of players that could be on the board. A lot of people are talking about a possible reunion with Nazem Kadri, especially now he has now officially requested a trade from the Calgary Flames. There's just a lot that Colorado could do here, and especially if Nathan MacKinnon's injury is longer term. I don't think it's going to be, but on the chance that is, you kind of need to weather the storm right now. And $10.8 million in this NHL is a lot of money, and we'll see how it plays out for Colorado. But I think that shedding some money there gives them a lot more options of what they could do, and they might not need to pay to retain.
Yeah, for a cup contender to have that much cap space, like you mentioned, they could add 9 million in cap it today, or if they wait till the deadline, that would grow to 10.8. They also have O'Connor on LTIR, which is another 2.5. They've already set their LTIR pool. So assuming O'Connor is also out for the rest of the season, like they could potentially dip into that as well. So you can add another 2.5 on top of the 10.8. So that that's more cap space than you could probably spend, considering you have to give up some assets. But it does allow you to go after a Kadri and not have to worry about retention, or name another player out there that maybe the team isn't thrilled about having to retain. Maybe there is some term on it, and now Colorado can just take that player to cap space. We've seen Carolina a number of years, not necessarily at the deadline, but in the summer, basically get players for free because they had cap space. They got Brent. That's how they got Brent Burns. That's how they got Max Pacioretty, a couple of years ago. So cap space is a weapon, and so yeah, it is hard to look at like what is the player cost to acquire when you have to factor in how much space did the team have, and was it was there needed to be retention, was there retention needed or not. So Colorado is in a spot where they can basically get players and they don't have to necessarily pay as much, and because a lot of the contenders are so tight to the cap, they could just be shopping in a much smaller pool, competing against other people. Like again, let's say it's a Dougie Hamilton or a Nazem Kadri, players with big cap hits. How many real contenders have the space for that? So instead of competing, for let's say a guy that's a $2 million cap hit, all the contenders are going for that guy. So maybe that's 8, 10 teams. But when you're talking about these big cap hit players, especially if the team doesn't really want to retain, now you're probably talking like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 teams. So again, that potentially allows you to get a better price, have to pay less in the trade if there's less competition for the player.
Exactly. That'll bring down the cost of the acquisition, and Colorado might not have to fork up the assets necessary because they're weaponizing their cap space that they have. So yeah, I like this deal for both sides too. I think Pittsburgh's done a really, really good job here, and Dubas has just basically acquired as many draft picks as possible. Like he has a lot that he can do this offseason with that. He can either make the picks and let them grow with this new young core. He can package them for pieces that he wants to acquire that teams want to trade up for. So there's a lot of different options Pittsburgh can have. And, right now they're currently in a playoff spot, but if Sidney Crosby is going to miss this extended period of time, you have to assume that there might kind of fall out of the playoff race. So it'll be interesting to see how he approaches this March 6th deadline in 8 days. But interesting deal for both sides. We'll see how it plays out. Let us shift gears here for a team that isn't necessarily flush with cap space right now, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. I did want to touch on this because you were kind of talking about it a few weeks ago, right before the kind of the roster freeze was put into place. But essentially, right now, the Oilers actually have the lowest current cap space in the NHL, only about $10,000. So what they did is during the break, they basically sent down Savoie to optimize their cap because they activated Adam Henrique from LTIR, and then they were able to accrue cap space to a fit an $897,000 cap hit by February 25th. Savoie makes $886,000. When they did that move originally, they could only fit $775,000 in a roster spot, which Savoie wouldn't be able to fit there. So they kind of sent him down at the right time to accrue that space, activated Henrique from LTIR, and then we're able to recall him yesterday with $10,000 to spare. So, Hart, do you want to break down the logistics about this too, and just how a salary cap accrual works in general?
Yeah, so this one's interesting because it's a team that has been in LTIR all season, Edmonton, knowing that they're going to be coming out of LTIR because they had Henrique they figured was going to be activated after the break, and they had no other players that could be on LTIR. So to come out of LTIR, they needed to clear a little bit of space. I think it was like 110,000 of annual cap it to come out of LTIR. So again, you could send anyone down, and the easy thing to do is, okay, well, we'll wait till Henrique's going to be activated, which was like the first day after the breakthrough this Wednesday, activate them and send a player down. And if they did that, they wouldn't have, let's say it was Savoie or someone else, they wouldn't have that player on the roster because they wouldn't have had the cap space to have it. They would have had to just send them down and not have room. But because they were, I guess, obviously forecasting, planning ahead, they could see that if they sent someone like Savoie down, when they did, he would be down for long enough to then accrue enough space to be able to call him back up. And when they sent him down, it was like you said, 775. That 775 grew to 890 in a week, and that's what happens as you get later in the season. Each day It's kind of worth more than earlier in the season because there's so few days remaining in the season. And so they were able to accrue space, which teams can accrue space if they're under the cap, even if they have a player on LTIR. That's the difference between having a player on LTIR and the team actually using LTIR. So for that last week, Edmonton had a player on LTIR, but they were under the cap and because they were not using LTIR. Then Henrique comes off LTR, which had no cap impact because they were under the cap. And again, they had the space though to call Savoie up. So good planning ahead to just kind of count out the days. And this is also kind of ties into, there were some things online about Easton Cowan, I think, with the Leafs and what players were allowed to be sent down during the break. So like Easton Cowan and Savoie were both fit into the same category. If they were on the roster for more than 80 days of the season, they could not be sent down to, like, at the start of the break or before the break. But that ended basically when players were reporting back to camp. Basically, guys were guaranteed 8 days of paid NHL time or NHL service time during the break. And once those 8 days were up, they could send players down. So that's exactly what Edmonton sent Savoie down. And technically, the Leafs could have sent Easton Cowan down at that point, which was, a week ago. It did, obviously, different circumstances. They didn't, but in Edmonton's case, they sent Savoie down. They needed the space. The one change in the rules this year is if you send a player down, they need to play one game in the minors before they can come up. In the past, you could just send them down and not have them play. But in this case, he had to play. So he did play that. He played one game. Notably, they played other games during that time, but he didn't dress for it. So clearly get him a little bit of action, but also just kind of comply with the rules and then not risk him getting injured because he has been a full-time NHLer this year. Get him back up. But yeah, now they have literally no space. You can't do anything with $12,000. And if they want to do anything at the deadline, they're going to have to move someone off the roster. Obviously, the candidate is Andrew Mangiapane, but they have no space. That 10,000 they have today will grow to a whopping 12,000 at the deadline. So that's nothing you can do with.
Yeah, and I think if Mangiapane if it was so easy to move him, like they would have already done that. I have a
Yeah.
feeling that they're kind of struggling, especially because I think he has an extra year on that deal at a roughly $3.75 million cap hit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for the Oilers. They're now qualify as a money in, money out kind of team. And then to your point too about Easton Cowan, I think the reason that Toronto wasn't able to send him down, I think he played. There was another rule where it was like if you play more than 16 games out of the last 20 games, you can't be sent down. And I think he played 17.
It's the same. It was the same rule as with Savoie. So a player could not be sent down to start the freeze if they were either on the roster for 80 days or had played 16 of the last 20. So both those guys had qualified for both. They were both on 80. But even if Cowan had only played 15 of the last 20, if he was on the roster for 80 days, he wouldn't have been eligible to be sent down. So he wasn't eligible to be sent down before the break, but he could have been sent down the same time Savoie was sent down, which was like 8 days into it or a week ago. And in that case, if Toronto had sent him down at that point, he could have played games and they could be accruing some more space. And they decided not to. And I guess that you could debate that, but from a cap perspective or a roster role perspective, he could have been sent down a week ago when the non-Olympic players had come back from the break.
Yeah, and I think the argument or why it drove Leafs fans crazy was because he was a healthy scratch in the game last night. And
No.
if you have a guy who's not playing, like you want to give him some time, especially someone that young to develop, like not even taking the cap implications of it, which like by itself would make sense to send him down, but then also just development and trying to make your top prospect at this point in the organization, give him some time and really just let him play some hockey. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for Edmonton. We're going to see they're going to be a cap in, cap out kind of team. And, deadlines in about a week and 8 days. And they're a team that's always looking for, maybe are they back in the goaltending market after they pulled Tristan Jarry in last night's game? It's back to square one for Edmonton, but we'll see how that all plays out. While we're talking about LTIR, let's bring in our next topic here, and that's the Kevin Fiala injury. So if you guys weren't watching the Olympics, he unfortunately, kind of took an awkward landing of a hit from Tom Wilson. And at the time, it looked really bad. Like he couldn't move his lower body and he was stretchered off the ice on his stomach. And you just knew from there that it was going to be a pretty serious injury. And almost immediately it was reported that he had surgery, I think, over in Milan. He'll be ruled out for the rest of the season. So a lot of people online were talking about how it just makes sense. Let's throw Kevin Fiala on LTIR. He has a $7.875 million cap hit. You get that money just willy-nilly. Just you put a guy on LTIR and you get that money. But we know that's not actually the case here. Fiala this year has 40 points in 56 games. Currently, the LA Kings have $13.1 million in current cap space, projected to be about $15.6 million in deadline cap space. So, Hart, I just want you to talk through the fans here. Why the general audience is not necessarily correct that if they put Fiala on LTIR, they wouldn't just get that much more additional cap space, and they actually would need to add a bunch of money to then put him on LTIR to get that space.
Yeah, so the common misconception is when a player's on or out for the season, you can put him on an LTIR and it's just like automatically free money, free cap space, or like people think that the player comes off the cap when they're on LTIR, which again is not the case. LTIR is a mechanism that allows the team to exceed the salary cap, and they can exceed the cap by if they're going to come back during the season by up to the limit for the year, the benefit limit, which is 3.8 this year, or if they're going to be out through the playoffs, up to their cap hit. But that's a key word. It allows them to exceed the cap by up to that amount, potentially. The way that you determine how much you can exceed the cap, though, is that there's a calculation. It depends how much cap space you have when you put the player on LTIR. And so that's the big catch, is if they just declared Fiala on LTIR right now, that actually provides no benefit and potentially hinders them because they have plenty of cap space right now. And so putting him on LTIR, it wouldn't make any sense. What they could do, though, and this is where it's not like a simple yes or no. They, like you mentioned, they have 13.1 million of annual cap that they can add today, or the deadline that's almost 16 million. They could add, a big chunk of that, almost all of that, have that as their cap hit, and then put them on LTIR, and then potentially exceed the cap by his cap hit minus how much space they had. So not to say that they can't use his cap hit on LTIR. It just would not make any sense to put him on LTIR now. But if they go on a shopping spree and basically trade for all the players that are going to be moved at the deadline, and they spend, call it 12, 13 million first of annual cap hit, yes, and they could put him on LTIR, and then they could spend another 5, 6, 7 million after that. So it would have to be a two-step process, which seems pretty unlikely, and that's a lot of assets you'd have to give out. You think to spend that much money or give out that much money, but it is technically possible. But those are like the logistics of how it would work.
Yeah, the only way I really see that kind of playing out is more like teams dumping cap. Like I don't see LA like spending a ton of assets to acquire all that money. But if teams want to give them, players that they don't want on their cap books anymore, like they could be an interesting target at this deadline to take on some dead money, and maybe them get assets for taking on the dead money. I think that might be the play for LA at this deadline.
Like think about a big cap hit guy like a Patrik Laine, right? Like that would potentially make a lot of sense. They have a lot of space. They could take his cap hit, probably potentially get an asset to do that. And then they would still have some money to shop, or if they wanted to like shop even more, again, it would have to be in a couple stages because that wouldn't quite use up their space. But you could maybe see a way to make it work where they could take some bad contracts to get paid to do it, like a Laine, or they think maybe Laine can help them with no acquisition costs. Yeah, and then they could do some other moves. So yeah, there is a way that they could weaponize that space and add. It just takes a lot of moving parts, and that would be a lot to pull off. And if they do that, we'll break it down here and applaud them for it.
I think Laine is a great example too, because he makes $8.7 million this year on cap, but he's actually owed less cash than the cap hit. So prorated, he's probably due maybe $2-3 million the rest of the season. Montreal's a team that's money in, money out, so they kind of want to get rid of that space. Eric Engels, who came on our PuckPedia show a few weeks ago, basically said he's under the assumption that Laine has played his last game for the Montreal Canadiens. So it just feels like a perfect fit. And then factor in the fact that LA and Montreal already made a trade this year with the Philip Deneau deal. So they have some sort of pre-existing relationship. So I see a lot of synergies in a move like that makes sense for both parties.
Yeah, and then the question is, does LA think that Laine can help? Like, is he going to play and can he help them? Or would they only do it to get an asset out of Montreal, right? And that's the key. And what we've seen in a lot of trades, sometimes from the outside, you would think a team should view a player as a positive trade value, and it's actually viewed as a negative trade value, or the opposite, right? So we won't find out until a trade happens, and we'll see what the return is. Like clearly, Colorado viewed the cap space on Girard, like clearing that cap space with Girard as a lot, and that's why they added a second round pick. Whereas like I said earlier, I would think that those players are pretty evenly across, considering they each have pros and cons. So it's
Right.
all in the eye of the beholder, and we can figure out how they view those players when you look at the trade return.
There's a lot of times where you hear a trade happening, and like I think it's funny when the insiders will tweet the trade, but then they won't tweet the return, and I'm like ripping my hair out because the trade in itself, without the full picture of the return, like doesn't mean anything to me. And so I think like when I see some certain trades, like you mentioned, the Colorado Pittsburgh one, I was pretty surprised that Colorado had to attach a second round pick to the Girard deal because I viewed those players as equals in terms of just their differing ages and the cap hits. Like it seemed like a pretty good wash. So the fact that Pittsburgh was able to get a second out of that, I thought was pretty tidy work by Dubas. And we'll see in the next 8 days kind of what transpires here. For our Q&A, which is brought to you by CoolBet, if you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can stay cool and bet responsibly. Puckpedia.com/coolbet. A lot of similar questions here, Hart, just as we approach the trade deadline in the next 8 days. Exciting time in general for hockey fans, especially now that we had that 3-week Olympic break. I think a lot of executives and team front office members were kind of figuring out, are we buyers? Are we sellers? I don't think there's too many teams. I know people will say that this is a thing, but I don't think too many teams are going to shift their strategies over these next 3 or 4 games. We'll see how it plays out, but I think a lot of teams have a general sense of where they sit in the area. And I think now that the standings are kind of starting to separate a little bit, I think you have more defined buyers and sellers. I just want to hear your thoughts on what you expect over the next week. Do you expect any shock deals to happen? A couple of things that come to mind immediately is I saw a Sergei Bobrovsky kind of trade rumor. He's an unrestricted free agent, and if he doesn't necessarily want to re-sign with Florida, he could be a guy that teams who are in desperate need of goaltending for a contender look to add. Another guy that has been on my mind a lot is Robert Thomas. I think he'd be a perfect fit in a place like Carolina that has plenty of cap space to absorb him, a team that's been desperately looking for like a 1C, although like he's not necessarily a high-end 1C, but you pair him with Aho, that's as good of a 1-2 punch down the middle as you're going to get in the NHL. They have plenty of draft capital prospects, and just the fit makes a ton of sense. What kind of deals, for the most part, do you think are going to happen? Do you think there's going to be any blockbuster kind of hockey trade deals? Or do you like where Marchand at the buzzer last year kind of took people by surprise? Or do you kind of see it more being just the guys that people are talking about, the expiring guys, maybe guys with an extra year on term, but nothing too crazy?
No, I think we'll see some bigger names move. Some that have been talked about, and some that haven't been talked about. There's always surprises every deadline or draft trading period. There's always some surprises. So I think that's a safe bet. Like you could go on those prediction sites and bet there'll be a surprising player moved. And then there's players that we've heard bandied about for a while that just never seem to go. Like a team I really think about in that way is St. Louis. Like their players are always seem to be on the market, but clearly they set a very high price for them. Like there was talk or rumors about what they were looking for Shen last year, right? And similarly for Kyrou and Thomas. Like, I think for those guys to move, the price is going to have to drop, and so that's probably more for St. Louis to decide than the other teams. But to me, like that's really interesting to watch. Like, does St. Louis finally ship out some players with cap hit on that off that roster when they've kind of been talking about it for a number of years? I think you said you don't think that the next few games will have an impact. I actually disagree. I think the teams are pretty tight. There's teams that are in a playoff spot, which didn't expect to be, like a Pittsburgh. Teams that are in the playoff mix that probably earlier in the year didn't expect to be, like Columbus, or now even like a San Jose. Seattle, I think, always wants to be in the mix, but they're kind of right there. And I think there's a few games, and then would they like to make a decision off more than just a few games? Of course, but that's a big difference between right now where 2 points out or 4 points out versus like in a week they could be 6 points out, and with 3 teams in between, that makes a big difference. And at that point, you have to take a hard look in the mirror and decide, like, is there a point in giving up assets for players? Is there a point in keeping our assets and not trading them and getting something if we're just going to miss the playoffs anyways? And so I do think, like, if a team kind of goes 500 and maybe the standings don't change between now and then, of course that probably doesn't impact. But a winning streak or a losing streak, or depending on the other teams around them, what they do, I think that could have an impact. And so for those reasons, like, I wouldn't be surprised if normally we see like it's a kind of a week or 2 weeks of trading activity leading up to the deadline. I actually would my hunch is that we actually won't see that much until like a day or two before. I don't think we'll see like the whole week before there's much activity, because I think there's so many teams that will want those extra couple days worth of games to like get that information and figure out where they truly are.
Yeah,
Think it
it's
up
not just one side either. Like it's the buyers and the sellers.
and
Like
sell it
both sides
exactly.
kind of need to wait on that.
Like we talked about LA, like I would have thought where they were trending, like it didn't make sense for them to buy, right? But they got a, like we talked about on our show, a really good deal on Panarin, who's a really
Right.
good player. So then you think, well, they did that, they might as well keep going and buy some more. Then Fiala gets hurt, right? So now you're like, well, what are they? And again, I think the next few games could have an impact, but I think they have some real decisions to make. Like, does it make sense to do nothing when they traded for Panarin? Does it make sense to buy though when maybe they don't make the playoffs, or if they do, again, things can happen, but are they really a cup contender? But also, you traded for Panarin, doesn't make sense then to sell players. So they're a really interesting team to watch as well. So to me, it's like LA, Columbus, Seattle, some of these teams that are sort of like right in and around where, and even if they make the playoffs, like if we're being honest with it, and if they don't make the playoffs, is it a waste if they either traded for players or didn't trade away their players? So those are the kind of teams that are really interesting to watch for me.
Yeah, for me too. Like I look at the Western Conference in general, and like these fringe teams, like you're mentioning, the LAs, the Seattles, Anaheims, like of the world. Like to me, I don't know if the West is open where those teams can really make a deep run in the playoffs, because you have Colorado, Minnesota, Dallas, Edmonton, Vegas at the top of that threshold. That's really hard to dethrone those five teams, and I don't necessarily know that the West is quote unquote open. Whereas like on the Eastern Conference, for example, I see the East being pretty wide open this year. Like the Metropolitan, like aside from Carolina, there's not really a strong quote unquote team in that division. And then the Atlantic, like you're looking at a lot of teams that are up at the top that haven't been there before and proven themselves in the playoffs, aside from Tampa Bay. And you're looking at the staples of the Floridas and the Torontos basically not in the playoff mix right now. And teams like Detroit, Buffalo, Montreal that are up there right now. So I think if you're in the East, I think you'd maybe be in a better position to buy, because maybe that conference is more wide open. But also, too, you have to understand some owners give the directive. So it's not necessarily coming from the hockey ops. There's a collaboration with ownership, and a first round playoff matchup generates, 2 or 3 games of revenue and merchandise sales and just a lot of money that flows in that owners really want. So sometimes they're not willing to sell because they think they have a chance to at least get some home playoff games and give the city something. So those are all factors that play into this. It's not necessarily simple hockey decisions at the end of the day, which is why you see the discourse online and fans getting upset.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned a team that I think we should touch on is Buffalo. Like, they need to make the playoffs
I want them in the playoffs so
for
bad too.
the mental health of the whole city and fan base and everything, right? They need to make the playoffs. They're looking like they're going to do that. They have some tough decisions to make though with Tuck. Now, how can you possibly trade him away? And
You can't.
you can't.
Impossible.
Whatever it takes. Like now, that's another question. Or do you risk like taking him through the playoffs unsigned and then losing him? And then, having said that, like whatever you do with Tuck, like you're now finally in a playoff spot. To me, that's a team, and they have some cap space. They have, they'll have 6 million of deadline space. That's a team that should be going after some players with term, like trying to make the team better. I don't think it would make sense to go after rentals potentially because, again, are they really a contender? But hey, you're going to make the playoffs. You're going to send an extra jolt to the locker room. To me, that's a team that should be going after some of these guys with at least a year, if not more, on their term. Some of these big names, and trying to make a splash. They also have assets. They've been sellers or neutral for many years. It's not like they've ever been buyers and giving up assets. So, yeah, I'd like to see what Buffalo does again. And you got a guy there now in Kekalainen, and that's he's not afraid to make moves. At first, he probably was wondering, "Am I going to be selling here?" Now things have completely changed, and that to me, they should figure it out. But even if they can't figure that out, they should be taking some swings here and adding some players.
Yeah, you're always interested when there's GM changes kind of mid-season, like a Jarmo Kakalainen, who has a pedigree of making moves and not being scared, but at the same time is coming into a new team and really wants to feel out like what the position is. And similarly in the West with Nashville, like Barry Trotz is stepping down and they're going to have a new GM in place, but for the deadline, he's the one guiding these decisions, and they're probably not going to make the playoffs. I know they've done well of late, but they're probably trending towards not making the playoffs. They have a lot of guys who have been, rumored to be going. Ryan O'Reilly kind of leads that list, but
Yeah.
Stamkos has even been in the Marchessault. So like there's a lot that could happen there. Maybe some of their younger guys too, like Evangelista, could get a lot of return given like his play and also his cap number. He's got no trade protection because he's in his RFA year. So that's another team that's interesting. But I'm excited for the trade deadline. It really is going to give us a better picture of how the stretch run's going to go for a lot of these teams. The NHL playoffs are coming up before we know it, a little month and a half out. Like Hart said, this week we got a special episode coming up on Wednesday on the PuckPedia Hockey Show. It'll be a good trade deadline preview, me, Hart, and a special guest. And I'm not sure if we're going to do Cap Central on Thursday, or maybe we're just going to do some quick hitting content as trades kind of circle through. You know where to get all the trade information. It's puckpedia.com. I think the trade tracker is already live, tracking how much money has been exchanged in these deals. And everything, and as soon as the trade happens, it's on PuckPedia. Players swap immediately. Cap hits are calculated. You know how much money teams have. So we're excited for it. Hart, any final words before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, this is an exciting time for us. A lot of action. So yeah, please check us out. You can sign up for PuckPedia alerts. Where you'll get emails anytime there's a trade, so you don't miss anything. Or you can go onto the site. We have our trades page. We also have a trade deadline period devoted page where you can see a recap of everything that's happening, including like how many first round picks or the most complicated condition on a pick, things like that. And yeah, thanks for having us with us, or thanks for being with us for next week. And to Keith's point, I think we'll do a Cap Central if there's some reactions for any trades that are interesting leading up to deadline day.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Hart, and everyone buckle up. We got a crazy 8 days ahead of us
Let's
in
go.
the hockey world. Let's go.
PuckPedia.com.